Today we are going to discuss about the history of electricity here. The 150 years of electricity we have had. This particular incident or this particular episode was provoked by, we have had, in this phase, we have had a blackout for I can say 2.5 days. Today at around noon is when power came back. So the blackout made me think we have no electricity in our face. So then I started thinking, when did electricity start and how it has been since its interception. We have had electricity for this recording was done in 2026. This recording was done in 2025. This recording was done in 2025, and it is exactly 150 years. This recording was done in October 2025, which is we have had 150 years. We have had 150 years of electricity around, and that is why I want to talk about the 150 years electricity from 1875 to 2025. In Kenya, we call it Kenya Power. In Kenya, we call it Kenya Power. Before Kenya Power, it was called Kenya Power and Lighting. Kenya Power and Lighting. And before Kenya Power and Lighting, we had East African Power and Lighting. Those days when Jomo Kenyatta was the president, we used to call it East African Power and Lightening. But no, it is not power and lightening, it is power and lighting. There's a difference between lighting and lightening. Lighting is light, and lightning is thunder. If you ask a Kenyan about electricity, many Kenyans, over 95%, will say it is steamer, but it is not steamer. Electricity, the right word for electricity in Kiswahili is nguvu za umeme, nguvu za umeme. So that is how it started from that is how I found it. I found it when it was East African Power and Lighting. Let us start from where it started all the way up to today, and why it had to change names from given certain changes, merging and demerging. What is demerging? Demerging is the opposite of merging. When 2 or 3 companies join together to be one, it is called merging. But when one company is broken into several parts, it is called demerging. So we are going to study the 150 years of electricity in Kenya. What a coincidence. In 1875, Said Bargash, the Oman Sultan of Zanzibar, acquired a generator. He acquired a generator to light his palace and nearby streets. When I said Said Bargash, it is possible that many, if not all, 844 do not know who Said Bargash is. But we who did the previous 763, everybody knows about Said Bargash, and Said whatever. These are Oman. They were the rulers of Oman, but they felt that they should rule Oman from Zanzibar because of the East African weather. So it is just like the King of England is also the King of Canada. but he stays in England, in London. The same as the Sultan for Oman was also the Sultan of Zanzibar, but he used to operate from Zanzibar. And if my memory is not wrong, the first or the most known Said was Said Said. Said is the most known. But Said Bargash, I think, was his son. So when he died, Said Bargash later came in. And in 1875, Said Bargash acquired a generator where the palace in Zanzibar was lit and nearby streets. Sometimes later, that is, I think, 33 years later, 1908, 1908, the generator was acquired. Imagine a generator after 33 years. Do you have machines nowadays which can last for 33 years? So in 1908, the generator was acquired by Harsi Emalji Jivanji, a Mombasa-based merchant. When he bought it, that was the time when there was the formation of Mombasa Electrical Power and Lighting Company, which was given mandate to provide electricity to Mombasa Island. To provide electricity to Mombasa Island. And you have heard of Jivanji, me mentioning that, Haral Malji Jivanji. Yes, he used to own Jivanji Garden in Nairobi, but later on it was given to Kenyans as a park. So that Jivanji is the one who owned this company who owned this company, and in 1908 is when they acquired the generator, and that is the time when they formed that company called Mombasa Electric Power and Lighting Company, whose mandate, as I've said, was to provide electricity to Mombasa Island. The same year, 1908, the engineer Clement Hartez was granted exclusive rights to supply Nairobi with electricity. The company was called Nairobi Power and Lighting Syndicate. Nairobi Power and Lighting Syndicate. So in the same year, two companies were started, Mombasa and Nairobi. The Mombasa one was to supply power to the island, and Nairobi was to supply power in the CBD. That was 1908. 14 years later, that is 1922, Mombasa Electric Power and Lighting Company and Nairobi Power and Lighting Syndicate merged. They merged to become one company under a new name. Remember, that was the time when Kenya, Kenya, our country used to be known as British East Africa, but it had just changed its name to Kenya Colony. 2 years after after British East Africa became Kenya Colony, that is when the two companies merged, but they decided to call the company, the new merged company, they decided to call it East African Power and Lighting. I think they were motivated because the country had just left its former name of British East Africa. East African Power and Lighting expanded outside Kenya. It expanded outside Kenya 10 years later, when in 1932 it acquired a controlling interest in TANESCO. People who are in Tanzania now know of TANESCO. It could be said it is the same company, but it could be said it is a different company, because the 1932 company was called Tanganyika Electric Supply Company Limited. Tanganyika. Today's TANESCO is called Tanzania Electricity Supply Company. Today's TANESCO. But that TANESCO, which was there in 1932, was Tanganyika Electricity Supply Company Limited. In 1936, a generating and distributing company for Uganda was started. It was started and merged with that, so that it became complete as East Africa. In 1948, East African Power and Lighting exited Uganda. When Uganda Electric Board, which is UEB, Uganda Electric Board, was established to take over distribution of power in Uganda. So Uganda, a parastatal started, which was called UEB, Uganda Electric Board, which was to take over the distribution of electricity in Uganda. So East African Power and Lighting remained in Kenya and Tanzania. On 1st February 1954, the Kenya Power Company was formed and commissioned to construct the transmission between Nairobi and Tororo, Uganda. Kenya Power Company. We have a Kenya Power Company now, but this one was different then. I think we can even call it Ketraco today, yeah? Because if you see the Kenya Power Company of 1954, its mandate is what Ketraco has today. But then we'll talk about that. So in 1954, 1st February, Kenya Power was formed and commissioned to construct transmission of power between Nairobi and Tororo. Before 1954, all electricity in Kenya was electricity that was a generator. I remember staying in Wajir, 1972, I was in Wajir, and even as late as 1990. Wajir, they were not on grid. They were not on grid. The power that supplied Wajir then was that there was a very big generator which supplied the town. And even when I was in Mandera, it was the same. So that is how Kenya was before 1954. Is that each town had a big generator which supplied electricity to the whole town. But in 1954, Kenya Power Company was started, and it started laying the power line from Nairobi all the way to Tororo. So the towns which were on the way, Nakuru, Eldoret, benefited from that. That is 1954. This was to transmit power generated at Owen Falls Dam to Nairobi, Kenya, or to Kenya. It was said to Kenya, but you see, Kenya, by then it meant only along that line, because towns which were far had a problem. East African Power and Lighting exited Tanzania in 1964 by selling its stake in TANESCO to Tanzania government. If you can remember, that is the time when Tanzania had started Ujamaa. So another TANESCO came, which instead of being called Tanganyika National Electricity, it was now called Tanzania. But then it was a parastatal, Ujamaa, everything belonged to the government. There was no, so in East African Power Lighting exited Tanzania in 1964. Due to the presence of the company only in Kenya, now you see, it started as East African Power and Lighting in Kenya, and then it expanded to other countries, Tanzania and Uganda. But when it exited all those countries and remained back in Kenya, they felt that there was no need of it being called East African Power and Lighting when it only had operations in Kenya. So it was renamed in 1983 as Kenya Power and Lighting Company. 1983 is when it was renamed Kenya Power and Lighting company. Then in 1997, Kenya Power Company demerged from Kenya Power and Lighting and rebranded as Kenya Electricity Generating Company. Yeah, for this 1997, it was felt that Kenya Power Lighting be divided into various forms, various companies, so that the company that whose work was to generate, there was three companies. There were three companies which came up. There was the company that is when I'm saying the word demerged. Demerged. We talk of various companies merging, two or three companies becoming one. But demerging means one company becoming two or three. So in 1997, there was a demerging where Kenya, the new company which came to be called Kenya Electricity Generating Company. Its work was only to generate. That was the work. As for the functions of electricity transmission infrastructure, was carved out, which we call demerging again, of Kenya Power and transferred to a newly formed company that was called KETRACO. KETRACO is Kenya Electricity Transmission Company. So the demerging, I said merging is three or four companies becoming one, but demerging is also a few companies coming out of one company. So we have seen so far that Kenya Power and Lighting demerged into KETRACO, which was KenGen first, which was to generate power. And then KETRACO was to transmission, power transmission. Put it simply, means that we have several types of generating power. We can play the more commonly used and the old used is the hydroelectric power. When the turbines turn, they make electricity. The second type is solar energy. You can have solar to make it electricity. You can even have the, what do you call, upper Naivasha, the geothermal. There are so many ways of, and we are even being told that we could have a nuclear power generating. So the company that generates power is the one that we have just said, that is called KenGen. And then when it produces, okay, there is another way of also producing electricity called wind generation. Yeah, from Loyangalani. Now, when it has been generated as a wind, when it has been generated as solar, when it has been generated as geothermal, in whichever way it is generated, even using generators, that is the work of KenGen, Kenya Generation. But from where it is, from Tana River, from Sondu Mirio, Turkwel Gorge and whatever, the power has got to be transmitted. It has to be transmitted. That is when the company came that is called KETRACO. It is Kenya Electricity Transmission Company. And then the power supplying to people went to Kenya. So whatever remained, that is Kenya Power Company. It reverted back to the former name of Kenya Power Company in June 2011. And that is the story of power in our country for 150 years. 150 years, things change, vindu vichenjanga. Can you imagine how it was 150 years when there was no electricity anywhere, anytime?